Shalom, I am Rain Ben Yehuda, prophetess of Judah, chosen by Elohim to walk before him in this generation. I am also known as Linda Denise Swain Shepherd, and today our lecture is entitled The Edom Theory Debunked. This is the theory that Esau, who is Edom, is the progenitor of all Caucasian peoples. We will find that in Genesis 25, 20 to 30. Let's go there. You're going to have to bear with me because I, as usual, am doing all my reading myself. Okay. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah or Rivkah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian, of Padanaram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated Elohim for his wife, because she was barren, and Elohim was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Elohim. And Elohim said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. That's 60 years old. And the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau, because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob had sod pottage, and Esau came from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, with that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. So those are the antecedents of how Esau's name was changed to Edom. Now, before we go any further, let's look at the definition of a theory. Now, a theory is a speculative idea or plan as to how something might be or may be done. It's also an idea or a system of ideas that explains something. Like once I had a theory, and I called up my father, because I'm from a divorced background and my father and I were living on different continents. And I said to him, What are you doing? And he was a judge. And he said, actually, things were quite quiet. So I said, well, hop on a plane and come over. I've got this theory. And he said, well, is it a good one? I said, oh, yeah, it's really great. So he hopped on a plane and came over. And I sat him down in the sofa and jumped in beside him. And I said to him, okay, here it goes. We exist before we are born and choose the parents that we come to. And my father said, that's a wonderful idea, because I can't imagine having any other parents than the ones I have. And I said, right, yeah, me too. So then we sat there thinking about it, and he was saying, to think that I would have chose them. He said, I think if I had that choice, I definitely would have chose them. So we sat for a while thinking, and then I said to him, okay, so the second part of the theory, because we're not finished yet, will require you to suspend your own reason. And then my father said, you're going to have to do a lot more work than that before inviting me to suspend my reason. And I said, well, why? I thought you liked the theory. And he said, yes. He said, I do like it. It's a wonderful theory, but it's going to need a lot more work. He said, imagine a child who was born into an abusive family and spends their formative years being tortured, or children born with birth defects. He said, imagine explaining to them that they chose, parents with challenging genetics. And at that point I said, okay, stop, because I could see immediately the tsunami coming toward me, a tsunami of negative opinions and opposition. So yes, it would have needed more work, because I was looking at it as a theory through my own lens, and that of having a good background and good parents, and he was looking at it that way. So from that perspective, it was a wonderful theory, and it would be a theory that could be embraced by all people who had come from good backgrounds with good parents. But there's the other side of it, so it definitely needed more work. And when that happens, you either have to put the work in or consign your theory to the dustbin. It doesn't work any other way. So that's actually the thing about theories. You may have a great idea and it may fit perfectly with your circumstances, but if it cannot stand up to what I call the threefold test of 1, investigation, 2, interrogation, and 3, a full-on assault. If it can't stand up to any one of those or all three of those, then there's a fundamental flaw in the theory, and it has to be reconsidered or consigned to the dustbin. So in order to prove or disprove the Edom theory, we must first collate all the evidence and then evaluate that evidence objectively. And to do so, we have to start at the beginning. Now, I'm going to be treating now of Genesis chapters 2. I'm going to go into Genesis chapter 4 and Genesis chapter 5. And I'm just going to talk my way through it, because I'm presupposing that all of you are familiar with the Genesis in the Tanakh. At least you damn well should be. So Elohim created Adam, and first of all, I also want to say that I have looked at the video of Deacon Ethan, I think that's pronounced that correctly, from RUIC. He did Edom, I think the Rise and Fall or something or the other, but he did a online lecture on Edom. And so did Ron Shields, aka Divine Prospect, from I think Kingdom Harbinger Ministries, but check that because I'm not sure. They both did lectures on Edom, and I've looked at both of those lectures. So we go to our beginning, because I will bring those two up as we go further along. So Elohim created Adam. Oh, that's the reason why I remember that, was because Ron Shield brought up the fact that the word Adam means also red or ruddy, and so does Edom. It also means red or ruddy, and so does Odom. That also means red and ruddy in the Hebrew. I'm not quite sure that the fact that the name signifies a color is relevant, but I did like the way that Divine Prospect managed that situation. It was quite creative. And I don't just look at Strong's online, although I do sometimes when I'm being lazy. I quickly go to Strong's Hebrews online, so online dictionary, and I also use Wiki when I'm being lazy too. But usually the Strong's Concordance I use is an 18th century version. I also use Gesenius, 1850 Hebrew English lexicon. He's also done a Hebrew Chaldee and Hebrew Aramaean, so you're able to check the words in all three languages, or four if you count the English. And I use also, not very much, but I do use the Westminster Bible. Not the New Westminster, I use the 1880 Dr. Shepherd edition. But it has, I wouldn't imagine that there's very much in the new edition that's not in that one, because by the 17th century Napoleon was already in Egypt or Kemet, and followed swiftly by the rest of Europe, and they were crawling all over that area, as well as in modern day Israel. Palestine, Lebanon, Syria. Layard had already found or discovered Babylon hiding in plain view. I think that was around 1847, because by 1850 he had his book out in Nineveh. What else did they find around that time? The Amarna tablets were discovered, the Moabite stele, and the Ugarit text. Those all came out then, and before the 1880 Westminster Bible, so it contains all of the same that I would imagine would be in the new, because nothing much was found after that, if we count Tutankhamun. So, where was I? So checking it through the 18th century versions of the Stronghold Concordance, Edom and Adam do mean red, but that doesn't necessarily imply that it pertained to their colour, because I could call myself blue, it doesn't mean I'm blue. I've got friends that are called green, a surname Green, and it's got nothing to do with their colour, but I did like the way that he dealt with that. So Adam was created, and then after that Elohim created Eve. So Adam had a companion and a partner. For Elohim said it's not good that man should be alone, and that's something that we should remember going forward if we have widows in our midst, if we have widowers, if we have single parents or divorced parents or orphans. It's good to call them up sometimes, invite them on the road trip, let them know that, someone's there for them. So Adam and Eve dwelt in paradise, in the garden called Eden, because we're going just according to the narrative at the moment. And they were told not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, neither of the tree of life. And then the snake comes along, and Eve eats of the fruit and offers it to her husband, and he gobbles it up without any reservations whatsoever. That's an interesting thing, that I was also looking at a video of General Yohana from the ISUPK, and he had a very good creative idea that moved away from that premise that man was peopled through incest, whereas his hypothesis was that there were other people in the garden, and he actually made quite an interesting case for that. So Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they've eaten the fruit, and then they, for the first time, feel shame, and they make themselves aprons because they are ashamed. And then they hear the presence of Elohim in the garden, which would probably manifest itself as a wind, and they hide because now also they feel something else, and that is fear. And Elohim comes and he says, "Adam, where art thou?" And then they explain what they've done, but you see through that text that Elohim does not approach them in a way that would terrify them, but as a father who is always open to his children to come before him. And you can see something that's quite interesting, because when they've committed this sin, they move away from Elohim and they start to hide from him, and that pertains to today, to people who call themselves backsliders, or they do something wrong. Instead of going toward Elohim, they go away from him, and the further and further they get, the harder it is for them to return back to him. So Elohim has opened the dialogue and enabled them to come forward, and he already knows what they've done, but he gives them the opportunity to speak. And that's always important, that we give people that opportunity to speak, that we don't shut them down as soon as they open their mouths, unless they really deserve it. I'm actually known for it, but only where someone will come onto my Facebook and they haven't read the entire Tanakh, they haven't read the New Testament, they haven't even read their own Quran, but they want to teach me, who's actually taken the time to read it, and more than once. And it's actually annoying because I know what they're going to say before they've said it. I know the answer to what they are going to inquire of, so it's irritating. It's better, as far as I'm concerned, if you should have a question if you've never read it, but you're not a teacher, if you don't even know your own subject, and that I find annoying. So I'll often say to people, just stop. And one woman very recently said, "Don't tell me to stop. I'm educated." Yes, but you haven't read the Tanakh, so how educated are you? So anyway, so Elohim gives people that opportunity to speak, and he doesn't shut them down. He allows them to say what it is that they've done, because he wants to have a dialogue, and that's for him teaching us that we should have a dialogue. He already knows what they've done, but he wants them to be able and to feel able to approach him and to speak, and not to be too terrified not to do so. Where parents present in that manner, you often see children in that family packing their little knapsack and trying to run away. So they explain to him what they have done, and then Elohim decides, okay, you're going to be punished for what you've done. And that's the process. The punishment, it does come. It doesn't mean just because you've revealed the truth or you've told the truth that punishment will not follow. Punishment does sometimes follow. It depends on what you've done. So Elohim decides that their punishment is to be removed from the garden, because one, fear has entered into them, and that fear that's in them will precipitate them stretching forth their hand to the tree of life. Also, Elohim can no longer trust that they will obey him. So for the disobedience, man falls. So they're removed from the garden. Elohim gives them animal skins and dresses them, and off you go out into the hostile world. So Adam knows his wife, and Cain is born, followed by Abel. And Abel is a shepherd. He watches the flocks. So we are definitely into the pastoral period and after the Neolithic, because that's the only time we see that type of herding of the flocks. Then we have Cain. He's a tiller of the ground. He works in the same way that Adam does. So it comes to the day that they bring their offerings. So it must have been the harvest, and Abel brings the best of his flock, and Cain brings a miserable offering, the worst of the fruit of the ground. And Elohim turns away from that offering of Cain, and that offering of Cain it's symptomatic of the way in which a lot of society treats Elohim. They come to him with, "Oh, I've got cancer, life-threatening disease, husband's in the hospital, wife's in the hospital," where only when something goes wrong. But they do not pray daily. And for these people, you should know that Elohim delegates responsibility. So you have an Elohim, which is the host of heaven or an angel, who manage the prayers and the petitions. And you will find yourself in the queue on that day when you think you really need him, because you're not regular. And that's how it works. There's a queue. You're not going to go straight to the front because you just suddenly got a problem. But those people who do pray regularly, their prayers advance swiftly before Elohim. So it's worth bearing that in mind, that come to him also with the good things that happen in your life. So Elohim turned away from Cain's offering, as one would, and Cain's countenance fell. That meant Cain became angry, and because which presupposes that he also usually had a very sort of genial face, smiley face, but his countenance became angry, and Elohim asked him why his countenance had fallen. And then also went on, and then Cain humbled himself, because he must have looked down, and Elohim said to him, if you do well, I will forgive you. But if not, sin is at your door. Its desire is towards you, but you can overwhelm it. And that's the thing. If you think in terms of the devil, and he has a CV, his position is tempter. That's what he does. He tempts us. Sometimes the temptation is irresistible, but here Elohim is telling us that we have it within ourselves to resist that temptation. Sometimes we don't, but we are able to, so we know that much. So thereafter Elohim goes off, and there's Cain and Abel obviously sit down to talk. And what people don't usually realize is that Abel is the younger brother. So Abel was probably, and we can reasonably conjecture, that he was criticizing his older brother, saying, I told you not to do this. You know, it was a really stupid idea. I knew you wouldn't get away with it. And maybe the final thing he said was, oh, wait till I get home and tell. And I had a situation like that with my brother when I was younger. We were living in South America, and he wasn't playing nicely, and he's older than me. So I thought the way the way to get him to play nicely, I picked up a stone and threatened him, and I said, you know, if you don't play nicely, I'm going to throw this at you. And he picked up a stone also, but the sun was in my eye, and it was really brilliant, and I couldn't get a clean shot at him. And he'd had his hand over his eye like that, so he was shielding his eyes from the sun, but I wasn't, because I thought, you know, if I don't do that, he'll think I've got a clear shot and I've got the advantage. And then I put the stone down, and next thing you know, I've got a scar just above here where his stone came, because he thought I'd thrown mine, so he threw his instead. And he'd cut my head there, so there was a little bit of blood, and I said, oh, you just wait, you're going to get it now. Obviously he was mortified. But that's how younger siblings behave with their older siblings. They're annoying. Younger siblings are annoying, especially to older ones, but we also, the younger ones, we also like it when we're right, because we're usually surrounded by siblings that are older than us, they know more than us, and they're usually right. So when we get something right, we kind of like to, you know, boast about that. And I'm sure that Abel was doing precisely that. And they had been sitting down and talking, it says so in the text, because then Cain got up. He got himself a stone and smacked his brother's head with it. And then he went off. We don't know whether there was what in the legal terms we would call the mens rea, like the mind to murder. It could have been just the action to shut him up that went horribly wrong. But in any way, Elohim ascribed guilt. And again, after Cain had committed murder, Elohim knew he'd already committed that murder, and he didn't say to him, what have you done? But again, he gives him that opportunity to speak and says to him, where is your brother? And Cain responds, am I my brother's keeper? And then Elohim says, what have you done? The blood of your brother cries out from the ground. So here again we learn that Abel had not ascended to the heavens, he was in the ground. And why is that? Because we assume that righteous people will immediately ascend, but where there's murder, then there's the requirement for justice, and justice can't come without judgment. So then Elohim judges Cain, and he says, it is too much for me to bear. And the thing is, Cain now he's lost his brother, through his own fault obviously, he's lost his parents, and he must go away from the presence of the Almighty. So from his perspective, he must have been thinking, what's there to live for? So Elohim understands that he understands the grievous nature of his crime and the consequences of them, and he mitigates to some extent, because he says to him, no one can kill him for a certain amount of generations. And then Cain goes off, and there to the land of Nod, where he knows his wife. That presupposes that other people existed. Some people say it was Cain. Adam and Eve had daughters, but then the question would arise: why would they, turn their daughters out to fend for themselves in the world and leave the sons in? And we would be talking about a hostile world with, certain animals that are not here with us today. So no, we can find antecedents for creation of all people simultaneously in Genesis 1:27. Let's get that and quickly read it. So Elohim created man in his own image. In the image of Elohim created he man. Male and female he created them. So these are antecedents for all people being created simultaneously, because most people that study Tanakh will know that there's more than one creation within the book of Genesis, usually referred to as the Yahvist document and the Elohistic document, and there's even a P document, the priestly one. So Adam and Eve then have another son. So Abel's murdered, he's died, he's gone. Cain has had to go away from them also. So they have another son called Seth, and then the line is established through Seth. So it goes from Adam to Seth to Enos to Canaan to Mahalalel to Yared to Enoch to Methuselah, Lamech, and then Noah. And Noah found grace in the eyes of Elohim, because the world had become profane and people were committing all manner of crimes, and those crimes came up before Elohim for a judgment, and he decided on a strict judgment, and that strict judgment involved destroying all the wicked ones and allowing only the righteous to live. Some people like to comfort themselves with, well, if we're wicked and there's lots of us, then he won't kill us. Well, actually, that's precisely what he will do, because when you think about it, the only people that were left on earth were 6 people, and those were found righteous in his eyes. So all the wicked ones were killed, and only the righteous ones got to live. So that was Noah and his wife, and his 3 sons according to the narrative, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, and their 3 wives, because they were practicing monogamous marriages and not polygamous marriages, but that's a different conversation. We can find that there were definitively 3 wives for the 3 sons in Genesis 7:13. Let's go there quickly. In the self-same day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japhet, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark. So 3 wives, 3 sons, and which is, in a sense, a monogenes theory, that the whole world as we have it today has been peopled by these 3 couples. The science does not bear that out, but that's the theory. So, to this end, the theory that Esau is the progenitor of all Caucasian peoples, or people's races, it is contradicted in Genesis 10:1-5. Let's go there. Now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet, and unto them were sons born after the flood. The sons of Japhet, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yavan, and Tubal, and Meshesh, and Tiraz. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Rephath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Yavan, Elisha, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dudanim. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided into their lands. Okay, there's actually a little contradiction if you go just a bit further. Everyone after his tongue, after their families and their nations. But Genesis 10 is before the Babel thing with the separation of people and their languages and the confusion of tongues. But here in 10, we're seeing that they had their own tongues already. Go figure. So, the Isles of the Gentiles. Now, when I looked at Deacon Eithan's lecture on Edom, he dismissed the idea that the ancient Caucasian Greeks were indigenous to the land of Greece. That's correct. They were not indigenous, but yet, so he was saying they're not descendants of Japhet. Let's look first at what these isles are. Let's go to Jeremiah 47 and 4. So we find out where the isles are. Right, we're at Jeremiah 47:4. Because of the day that cometh to spoil all the Philistines, and to cut off from Tyrus and Zidon every helper that remaineth, for Elohim will spoil the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Captor. Okay, so we now got to go find out what Captor is, so let's go to Jeremiah 25:22. So we're in the same place. And all the kings of Tyrus, and all the kings of Zidon, and the kings of the isles which are beyond the sea. So we're not talking about the islands around in our area, we're talking about foreign lands beyond the Mediterranean. We can find that in Isaiah 24:15, and then we'll go to Isaiah, we'll stay in Isaiah 24:15, yeah. Wherefore glorify ye Elohim in the fires, even the name of Elohim El of Israel in the isles of the sea. And if you go to 11:11, Isaiah 11:11, you'll see that they called all foreign lands isles. 11:11. And it shall come to pass in that day that Elohim shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. So there it speaks to the scattering of the 12 tribes of Israel, and we're definitely in the isles, lots of us, and scattered all around the world. So there in the scripture we can see that when our prophets are speaking about the isles, they're speaking about foreign lands. They'll be speaking about places like Europe. So, okay, so Deacon Eithan submits that because ancient Greece was not peopled, because Caucasians are not indigenous to ancient Greek, they do not fall under the reference of Genesis 10:1-5. The problem with the theory that Edom, being the progenitor of all Caucasian races, is one, it contradicts the biblical narrative, and therefore that of the prophet Moses, who plainly states that all Esau's wives were melanated women. Let's go to Genesis 36, 2-3. So the prophet Moses, who's written the Chumash, also called the Torah or the Pentateuch, he has told us that Esau married 3 melanated women. So if your presumption is that Esau is the Caucasian, when he married melanated women, he could not produce Caucasian children. So let's look at, what did I say, Genesis 36, 2-3. Let's just find that. Okay, here we are. Esau took his wives of the daughters of Canaan, Ada, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Aholibamah, the daughter of Anna, the daughter of Zeboim the Hivite, and Basimath, Ishmael's daughter, sister of Nabaioth. So even Ishmael's daughter was an Egyptian, from ancient Kemet. All Esau's wives were melanated women. So a Caucasian man, melanated woman, will produce mixed race children. They will not produce Caucasian children. So that's one spanner in the works of that theory. It also cannot explain who Esau would have married in order to produce these Caucasian children. He would have needed a Caucasian wife, which he doesn't have if he is the progenitor of all Caucasian people. Number 3, it alleges no people existed post-Neolithic times. Well, we know that's not true because we have fossil evidence, we have archaeological evidence demonstrating plainly that Caucasian people were already on this planet. The other thing with the Esau progenitor of all Caucasian people hypothesis is that it also cannot explain how Esau's offspring would have grown so exponentially in such a short period of time. When it rejects Genesis 10, 1-5, where the prophet Moses tells us that the Gentiles were in the isles, it rejects it without addressing the fact that the prophet Moses was writing in the time when Caucasian people were already in those isles. Now we have another, so he would have recorded them as pertaining to that isle. We have another situation where that actually has happened, and we have the proof of that. The Canaanites, their original home, they may have been originally dispatched to Israel, but they didn't go there. They went to the Persian Gulf by the Eritrean Sea, and then there was an earthquake, and it was only after the earthquake that they journeyed on and migrated into Palestine. Yet when the prophet Moses comes to write the Chumash, he records them as though they were indigenous to that area, because at the time of his writing they were living in that area, and the whole area then belonged to them. So at the time of writing, and you can see that if there's in Crete, for example, if there's one of the frescoes, it's called, I think, La Parisienne, and it's at the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, and the person in the image is a Caucasian, and the time span we have is about 15th century BC. So Caucasians were certainly around by the 2nd millennium BC, and that's the millennium that the prophet Moses was also operating in. The 2nd millennium goes from about 2000 BC to 1001 BCE. BCE to BCE was BCE. So the prophet Moses, and they were around literally at the same time that Moses was writing. If you've seen my book, the Bible Math, where I work out the chronology from the beginning, basically from our Genesis all the way through, you'll see exactly where the prophet Moses is placed. And in that time period, the 15th century BC, because that's exactly the century that we're treating of, because all the maths add up to that century, then we definitely have Caucasian people in Crete, we have Caucasian people in Greece, we have Caucasian people in Armenia, we have Caucasian people in Romania. By this time, they may not have been indigenous to these lands. Certainly the Romanians that are in Romania today replaced the Hamangian people of the Cucuteni culture, but that would have been around between 30 to 20,000 BC. So at the time that the prophet Moses was writing, definitively Caucasian peoples were already in ancient Greece, and they were already in ancient Crete and Cyprus and other places, and there is a lot of archaeological evidence that treats of that. So that is something that is rejected in that hypothesis. When you reject the Genesis 10:1-5, we're also rejecting the Canaanite in the same book of Genesis, because they're not original to that land that they migrated to. Their original home was on the Eritrean Sea, and there's a lot of evidence for that. There were definitely the earthquakes that they talk about, but when they migrated into Israel, which was first known as Canaan, we find on the Persian Gulf the same names of places that they renamed later on when they'd moved, because they're sentimental. So we have a list of those names there, and then when you go into the history, you can actually find different things in the archaeology. So you've got to look at that. When you're treating of Esau, who is Edom, I think that Divine Prospect did a better job, because you would have to make that specific to a specific people, but you couldn't bring them all into it as Deacon Ethan has tried to do, because in order to do so he's contradicting the prophet Moses, which he has absolutely no right to do, and he is presupposing, in fact he's rewriting the whole history, and he's altering world archaeology to force it to fit into that theory that he has that isn't working. So he needs to go back to the drawing board with that theory, either revise it, reconsider it, or consign it to the dustbin, because it doesn't work as it currently stands. So these are the things that we have to look for when you're saying that Esau, who is Edom, and I know exactly why you've gone to sort Esau is Edom and Edom is all Caucasian peoples, because of the scripture that you find that Elohim hates Esau but loves Jacob, and obviously the transatlantic slave trade. And we have a lot of reasons to have a lot of grievances against Caucasian people, but at the end of the day, Elohim requires us to be honest. And in fact, in the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, it does say, thou shalt not lie. And when you read further along, it also says that Elohim finds liars an abomination. So it's very difficult to say that you are a holy person and you're following Elohim and you're lying through your teeth, because when you're lying, you're alienated from Elohim and you're not following him at all. So you have to look at other ways, but you can't change the whole of world history to suit your theory. You have to work with the historical evidence, with the archaeological evidence, and certainly with the biblical evidence if you're saying that you support the narrative. So here that we do have it, so those are the problems with that theory that all Caucasian people are Edom. First of all, if Edom is the first Caucasian, how did he have Caucasian children with 3 black wives? Secondly, why does how can you say that Caucasian people did not exist post-Neolithic, because the Genesis is post-Neolithic? And if you go, because we usually, well, actually not we usually, but usually you will find that archaeologists date the Neolithic to about 7,000 BC, 7,000 coming down to to about 5000 BC, and the Genesis is younger than the Neolithic, and we know from the lower Paleolithic that we also had people in the Blomblos Cave, South Africa. People were existing 350,000 years ago. That has since been revised to 600,000 years ago because of the find of Lucy in Ethiopia, dated to 1.1 million years ago. So Caucasian people, according to every scientist that you will find, have been in existence on the planet for 7 to 10,000 years, so they're older than the Genesis. And if you go back to the Cro-Magnon, then they would go to more like 30 to 40,000 years. So Caucasians were on the planet before Esau was born. And there's certainly evidence of their existence in the archaeological arena, and you'll find that you'll find them in the Minoan period. In fact, you'll find Caucasians before even Moses was born, or certainly before he became active, because in the Minoan period it's about that was 2nd century BC, and then it went into the Mycenae period, and the Mycenae ended around 12,000 BC, and then you see the Hellas coming in and taking over, the Hellas or the Hellenes, which are the Caucasian Greeks. So you have to line up the theory with the archaeology, with the history, with any scientific evidence that you can come across, but you can't just make a blanket statement that this is how it is, and then when you go to have a look at that theory, it doesn't line up. Theories have to line up, and we have to be willing to reconsider the theory or dismiss it completely and go back to the drawing board. But the theory that Esau is the progenitor of all Caucasian people is completely debunked, and it's literally debunked on the fact that the Neolithic, they existed during the Neolithic. It's debunked on the fact that if Esau is the first Caucasian, married to 3 melanated women, he could not have produced Caucasian children. It's debunked by the prophet Moses, who places the Caucasians in the Isles at the time of writing, and so wrote them in as the Gentiles living in the Isles. And finally, let's just explain the word Gentile. Hebrews used the word Goim, which was transliterated Gentiles, and what Gentiles means to the Hebrew Israelite is basically anyone who is not a Hebrew Israelite. It incorporates the word heathen, which is someone irreligious, and a pagan is someone who doesn't believe in who doesn't engage in the worship of the true God. So those terms probably need to be looked at again, because the world has really changed a lot since that time, and you can no longer call people irreligious who are believing in their religions, even if it's not a religion that, we accept. But definitely the Caucasian people are all Edom. That theory is now consigned to the dustbin of history until and unless someone comes up with a better idea. The one advanced by Divine Prospect, that would also need to be reworked, because again, no, he actually said that they were, I don't think he brought up the fact that Esau had melanated wives, all 3 of them. But I think he did bring up a point that there were some admixtures. But in any event, we have to stick to the scripture, and we have to keep our truth and keep our honesty, because that's what Elohim requires from us, and we should be obedient and respectful of what our Lord requires from us. Shalom.